In Boston, Massachusetts, the renowned pediatric surgeon Dr. Ethan Harrison, he was known for his exceptional skill and generous heart. Working at the prestigious Children's Medical Center, Ethan dedicated his hours to not only saving lives, but also offering hope to families facing the most difficult times. Among his colleagues, he was called the doctor with miracle hands because of the impressive number of complex cases he could solve. Ethan's routine was intense, but he always found time to talk to his little patients, using his empathy as an instrument as powerful as his scalpel. One afternoon, while reviewing charts, a nurse named Grace he entered the office with a worried expression. "Dr. Harrison, we need you in the emergency room. It's a girl, and it looks serious," she said urgently. Upon arriving at the emergency room, Ethan found Maddie, a 7-year-old orphan, brought in from a local shelter after suffering an accident. She had been run over while running away from a group of children who were chasing her. Maddie had serious injuries, including damage to her trachea that left her unable to speak. His frightened look and shaking hands told a story of suffering much greater than the accident. Ethan immediately took over the case. He studied the scans carefully, realizing that surgery to repair the damage would be extremely risky. The shelter director, SRA Penelope Walsh, explained that Maddie had no family and that the shelter could barely afford basic medical care. "We will do everything we can," said Ethan, determined. "This girl will not be abandoned again." The operation was scheduled for the next morning, and Ethan spent the night reviewing every detail. He knew the chances of success were slim, but he also knew that Maddie deserved the best chance possible. During that time, he felt an inexplicable connection with the girl. His fragility evoked something deep within him, a mixture of compassion and responsibility. On the day of the surgery, the medical team was silent as Ethan led the procedure. For nearly 5 hours, he worked with almost superhuman precision, rebuilding damaged tissue and stabilizing Maddie's breathing. Every movement of his hands was guided by a mixture of science, faith, and instinct. Finally, the critical moment arrived. Ethan adjusted the equipment and waited. When Maddie began to breathe on her own, a sigh of relief went through the room. He knew there was still a long road to recovery, but the first hurdle had been overcome. For the team, it was yet another example of why Ethan was so revered. After surgery, Ethan visited Maddie in the ICU. She was awake, although still without a voice. When their eyes met, she held his hand tightly, as if she wanted to say something that words couldn't express. Ethan stayed by her side, promising that he would do everything he could to help her recover completely. As he watched the girl sleep, Ethan felt something different about this case. He didn't know why, but Maddie awakened in him a desire for protection that went beyond the professional. He knew his life was about to change in ways he didn't yet understand. In the days following the surgery, Maddie began to show signs of recovery. Ethan visited her regularly, bringing picture books and little games to entertain her. Although she still couldn't speak, Maddie communicated with shy smiles and deep gazes that seemed to contain worlds of emotions. Ethan noticed that she was beginning to trust him, and that bond deepened with each encounter. During a conversation with SRA Walsh, Ethan learned more about Maddie's difficult life. Abandoned at the door of a shelter as a baby, she had grown up in an environment of constant neglect and instability. "She is a special girl," said the director, with a melancholy tone. "But she never found anyone willing to really take care of her." Those words stuck in Ethan's mind. While Maddie recovered, the medical team discussed the next step. Hospital discharge was close, but without a family to take her in, Maddie would have to return to the shelter. Ethan couldn't bear the idea. He knew the system was flawed and that Maddie, a vulnerable and now medically challenged child, needed much more attentive care. After days of reflection, Ethan made a decision that surprised everyone. He offered to take Maddie home. "She needs stability," he said in a meeting with hospital administrators and shelter representatives. "And I'm willing to be that stability." Although he faced initial resistance, Ethan argued passionately, explaining that he had the resources and, more importantly, the willingness to care for her. When he told his wife his decision, Charlotte, the reaction was surprise. "Do you want to bring a child into our house like this, without warning?" she asked, trying to understand Ethan's intentions. He explained the connection he felt with Maddie and how he couldn't bear the thought of letting her go back to the shelter. "I know it's sudden," he said, "but I feel like this is the right thing to do." Charlotte, although cautious, knew Ethan's kind heart. They had no children, something that had weighed on the couple's dynamic for years, and Charlotte knew how much Ethan longed for a greater purpose in his life. After a long conversation, she agreed to give it a chance. "If you believe you can make a difference in her life, then we will do it together," she said, holding his hand. The day Maddie left the hospital was full of emotions. Although she was still shy, she seemed excited as she held Ethan's hand as they walked to the car. The hospital staff applauded, and even Mrs. Walsh smiled. "Good luck, doctor," she said, "and thank you for giving Maddie something she never had, a family." When they got home, Ethan introduced Maddie to Charlotte. The girl looked at her with curiosity and a hint of nervousness. Charlotte, although initially reserved, knelt down to Maddie's level and said, "Welcome, darling. We are happy to have her here." Maddie smiled, a small smile, but full of hope. As he showed Maddie around the house, Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment. He knew taking care of her would be challenging, but he was ready to face anything. What he didn't know was that the real surprise was about to happen. A revelation from Charlotte that would completely change the course of their lives and Maddie's destiny. The first days with Maddie at home were a mix of adaptation and emotional discoveries. Ethan and Charlotte adjusted their routines to accommodate the girl, ensuring she felt comfortable in an environment so different from the shelter. Charlotte cooked simple, hot meals while Ethan read stories to Maddie at night, even though she could only respond with attentive looks and small smiles. However, behind all the serenity, there was a silent weight that Charlotte carried and that Ethan had not yet noticed. One night, while Ethan was putting Maddie to bed, Charlotte was in the kitchen, staring at an old photo she had kept in a drawer for years. It was an image she had tried to forget, but now seemed impossible to ignore. Maddie's gaze, so deep and familiar, brought back memories that Charlotte preferred to keep buried. She knew she couldn't keep that secret any longer, not now that their lives had changed so drastically. When Ethan went down to the kitchen, he found Charlotte sitting at the table, holding the photo with shaking hands. "Charlotte?" "What there was?" he asked, worried. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice full of hesitation. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've hidden for a long time." He sat down next to her, trying to decipher the seriousness in her eyes. Charlotte told the story she had kept since she was very young. When she was 17, she became pregnant, but due to family pressure and fear of not being able to care for a child, she was forced to put the baby up for adoption. "It was the hardest decision of my life," she said, with tears in her eyes. "I never stopped thinking about her. I always wondered where she was, if she was okay. But I never had the courage to look for her." Ethan was silent, trying to absorb the confession. "Do you think Maddie?" he began, but stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Charlotte nodded slowly, her eyes, "Ethan, I see so much of myself in her. Age comes with time, and when you mentioned that she was abandoned as a baby, I can't ignore that." The impact of Charlotte's words was immense. Ethan felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He looked at the photo on the table, an image of a teenage Charlotte holding a baby, and mentally compared it to Maddie. It was impossible not to notice the similarities. But what if it was just a coincidence? He knew they needed answers, but he also knew they couldn't pressure Maddie while she was still adjusting to her new home. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house changed. Ethan tried to act normal with Maddie, but Charlotte's revelation constantly distracted him. Charlotte, in turn, spent more time close to Maddie, trying to create a stronger bond with the girl. Maddie seemed to respond positively, but she was still reserved, as if she was afraid that everything might suddenly disappear. Ethan suggested to Charlotte that they take a DNA test to clarify her doubts, but she hesitated. "What if it's not true?" she asked, afraid of disappointment. "What if it is?" Ethan countered. They knew this was the only way to find out the truth, but they both feared the impact it would have on Maddie and their own relationship. While awaiting the results, Ethan and Charlotte supported each other, facing the anxiety together. Deep down, They both knew that no matter what the test revealed, Maddie was already a part of their lives. But the doubt was a weight they needed to ease, both for themselves and for the girl they now called their daughter. The envelope with the DNA test results arrived on a sunny morning. Ethan and Charlotte were in the kitchen when the mailman left the package at the door. They looked at each other, both hesitant to open the envelope that could confirm or dispel the suspicions that had accumulated over the last few weeks. "Do you want me to open it?" Ethan asked. Charlotte nodded, her breathing heavy with the tension of the moment. Ethan opened the envelope carefully, taking out the sheet of paper that contained the answers they both feared and longed for. His eyes scanned the lines until he found the crucial information. He looked at Charlotte in disbelief as the words left his mouth almost in a whisper. "It's positive. Maddie is your biological daughter." Charlotte brought her hands to her face, tears flowing as emotion took over her. The impact of the confirmation was overwhelming. Charlotte felt a mixture of joy, relief and guilt. Joy at finally finding the daughter he had lost. Relief knowing Maddie was safe. And guilt for having left her behind, even though the circumstances at the time were so difficult. "I need to tell her," said Charlotte with determination. Ethan agreed, but warned that they should approach the subject sensitively, considering Maddie's traumatic past. That afternoon, Charlotte sat with Maddie on the couch. The girl, still shy, looked at her curiously. "Honey," Charlotte began, gently holding Maddie's hands, "there's something very important I need to tell you." With Ethan's help, she explained the story of her youth and how she believed Maddie was the daughter she had lost. Maddie didn't react immediately, but her eyes filled with tears, as if something inside her had clicked. Ethan intervened to reassure Maddie. "You don't have to worry about anything. What matters is that we are together now, and that will never change." Maddie looked at the two of them, first at Charlotte and then at Ethan, before hugging them both tightly. It was a moment of pure connection, something neither of them would ever forget. Over the next few days, the dynamics in the house changed in subtle but significant ways. Maddie began to open up more, responding with gestures and even small sounds when Charlotte or Ethan spoke to her. She seemed more relaxed, as if she knew she had finally found a home where she was truly loved. Charlotte began to dedicate even more time to the girl, teaching her how to cook, playing games, and even helping her express emotions through drawings. Meanwhile, Ethan began researching options to help Maddie regain her speech. He contacted fellow specialists and made appointments with speech therapists and therapists. "We're going to do everything we can to give her the life she deserves," he told Charlotte. They were both determined to give Maddie not only a home but also a bright future. But despite the joy, there were challenges ahead. Maddie's reintegration into Charlotte's life brought complicated questions, such as the details of her adoption and abandonment. They knew they needed to investigate further into what had happened at the shelter and how Maddie ended up in her current situation. "If we're going to move forward," Ethan said, "we need to fully understand her past." As they faced these challenges, the strength of Charlotte and Maddie's newfound bond continued to grow. The revelation had changed everything, but it had also brought new clarity to everyone's lives. They were ready to face whatever came, together, like a true family. With the confirmation that Maddie was Charlotte's daughter, the next step for the couple was to understand the events that led her to the shelter. Ethan and Charlotte felt that in order to move forward as a family, they needed to fill in the gaps in Maddie's story. Charlotte believed this quest would also help Maddie accept her new reality and find peace with her past. The first point of contact was the shelter director, SRA Penelope Walsh, who had taken care of Maddie for years. At a meeting at the shelter, Penelope reviewed Maddie's records. "She was left here when she was only a few months old," he explained, pulling a worn file folder. "An anonymous woman turned Maddie in and disappeared without a trace. I always thought it was a desperate situation." Charlotte listened in silence, her mind going back to the darkest moments of her youth. Although she hadn't personally abandoned Maddie, she remembered giving the baby to an adoption agency. "The woman who brought Maddie in might have been an assistant at the agency," suggested Charlotte. "But I need to know who it was." Penelope agreed to help and provided additional details about Maddie's time at the shelter. Ethan, ever methodical, suggested they hire a private detective to track down the information. If there was an agency involved, they may have records that explain what happened, he said, determined. While waiting for answers, Ethan and Charlotte continued to help Maddie adjust. Charlotte spent hours talking to Maddie, trying to address the past in a sensitive way. Although the girl still didn't speak, she began to respond with more confident gestures and expressions, as if she was beginning to fully trust her new parents. Days later, the hired detective, Mark Dalton, presented the first results of his investigation. He discovered that the adoption agency Charlotte had contacted at the time had closed years ago, but some records had been preserved in a state archive. Mark managed to track down the name of an assistant named Deborah Miles, who worked at the agency at the same time Maddie was surrendered to the shelter. Charlotte and Ethan arranged a meeting with Deborah, now retired and living in a quiet neighborhood in Providence, Rhode Island. When they met the woman, she was open to talking, but also cautious. "I was dealing with a lot of kids back then," she said. "But I remember Maddie. It was a complicated situation." Deborah revealed that she had been ordered to take Maddie to the shelter after the biological mother, unable to deal with pressure from the family, decided to give up the baby. Although she did not know her mother's full name, Deborah provided detailed information that confirmed Charlotte's story. "You did what you thought was right," Ethan said, trying to comfort his wife. Charlotte, however, felt a mixture of relief and pain upon hearing the details. As they drove home, Charlotte reflected on the impact her decision had had on Maddie's life. "She went through so much because of me," he said, with tears in his eyes. Ethan held her hand and replied, "You can't change the past, but it can change the future. And that's exactly what we're doing now." This search for the past not only helped Charlotte and Ethan better understand what Maddie had faced, but it also strengthened them as a family. They were more determined than ever to provide Maddie with a stable, loving home, making up for the difficult years she had experienced. With the gaps in their past filled, Charlotte and Ethan turned their attention to Maddie's future. They knew that helping the girl feel safe and loved would be a gradual process, but they were willing to face each challenge. The first step was to create a routine that balanced medical care, therapeutic activities, and leisure time that allowed Maddie to explore her new life. Ethan contacted a renowned speech therapist, Dr. Caleb Brooks, specialized in cases of trauma that affect speech. During the first appointment, Dr. Brooks evaluated Maddie and explained that her inability to speak was the result of both physical injuries and deep emotional trauma. "Ethan's surgery was a big step," he said, "but now we need to help her overcome her emotional blocks." Sessions with Dr. Brooks became part of Maddie's weekly routine. He used interactive games and activities to encourage her to make sounds and form simple words. At first, Maddie resisted, but over time she began to participate more actively. At home, Charlotte and Ethan reinforced the practices suggested by the therapist, transforming everyday moments, such as cooking and playing, into learning opportunities. In addition to therapies, Charlotte started teaching Maddie how to draw. She discovered that art was a powerful form of expression for the girl, and she began creating drawings that reflected her emotions and experiences. One day, Maddie drew a house with 3 figures holding hands, a clear representation of her new family. Charlotte was thrilled to see the drawing and placed it in a prominent place in her living room. Meanwhile, Ethan encouraged Maddie to socialize. He organized get-togethers with the children of friends and neighbors, creating an environment where Maddie could interact with other children. Although shy at first, Maddie began to loosen up, joining in on games and even letting out soft giggles. Every little progress was celebrated as a big victory for the family. Maddie's new life also brought challenges. At first, she had frequent nightmares and woke up crying, unable to explain what scared her. Charlotte spent nights by her side, calming her with lullabies and comforting words. Over time, these episodes lessened as Maddie felt safer in her new home. Another memorable moment was Maddie's return to school. Ethan and Charlotte chose an inclusive school with resources to meet the girl's needs. On the first day, Charlotte stood by Maddie's side, holding her hand as she walked her to class. Although nervous, Maddie took small steps towards the teacher, looking at Charlotte as if seeking approval. "You'll be fine, sweetie," said Charlotte, smiling. With the school's support, Maddie began to progress both academically and socially. One day, she came home with a drawing of a rainbow and handed it to Charlotte, pointing to the word family written in the corner. Charlotte held the drawing with tears in her eyes, knowing that Maddie was finally finding her voice, even if it was through small gestures. As time passed, Maddie became an integral part of Ethan and Charlotte's lives, bringing joy and renewing their purpose. Every smile, every step, and every word brought the family even closer. They knew the future would still bring challenges, but they were confident that together they could overcome any obstacle. With Maddie's past clarified and her future beginning to take shape, Ethan, Charlotte, and Maddie finally found something they had all longed for: a home, a family, and the certainty that, despite everything, they had found each other. The months of therapy with Dr. Caleb Brooks began to bring significant changes to Maddie. Although she had not yet completely recovered her speech, small improvements were notable. She began making clearer sounds and babbling simple syllables in moments of emotion, such as when playing or trying to get Ethan and Charlotte's attention. This progress lit a flame of hope in the family, who continued to encourage Maddie with patience and love. One afternoon, while Charlotte was in the kitchen making cookies, Maddie came in and gently pulled her hand. The girl pointed to the cookies on the counter and, to Charlotte's surprise, tried to say something. Although the sound was indistinct, there was a clear effort to form the word mommy. Charlotte froze for a moment, trying to process what she had heard, before bending down and hugging Maddie with tears in her eyes. "You said something, honey. You did it," she said, excited. Ethan, who arrived soon after, was informed of Maddie's progress and immediately called Dr. Brooks to share the news. "She's trying, doctor," he said. "She's really trying." Dr. Brooks explained that these moments were important milestones and that Maddie was gaining confidence in her ability to communicate. "Your emotional support is the foundation of this," he added. The next day, Ethan decided to take Maddie for a special outing in Boston Common, one of the oldest parks in the city. He wanted to celebrate her progress and provide moments of relaxation. As they walked together, Maddie curiously watched the squirrels and children running around, occasionally pointing to something that caught her eye. She seemed more excited and confident than ever. While they were at the park, Maddie saw a seller selling colorful balloons. Her eyes lit up, and she pulled Ethan toward the cart. When she got close, she pointed to a blue balloon and tried to say blue, making a sound close to the word. Ethan smiled widely and bought her the balloon, saying, "You're doing so well, Maddie. I'm so proud of you." These small moments were vital to Maddie's emotional and physical recovery. Back home, Charlotte continued to encourage Maddie to use her voice, turning simple activities like choosing clothes or books into opportunities for practice. Maddie, although still shy, began to respond more frequently, making sounds that came close to words. However, these advances also brought emotional challenges. Maddie, in moments of frustration, would cry when she realized she couldn't form complete words. Charlotte and Ethan were always by her side in these moments, offering hugs and words of encouragement. "You don't need to rush," Charlotte said. "We are here for you, always." A bigger milestone happened during a family gathering with close friends. Ethan was telling a funny story about an incident at the hospital when Maddie spontaneously let out an audible laugh. Everyone in the room stopped, shocked and emotional. "Was it her?" asked Megan, a family friend. Charlotte nodded, tears in her eyes, as Ethan hugged Maddie. This progress has brought a renewed sense of optimism to the family. They knew Maddie's journey would still be long, but every little sound, word and smile strengthened the bond between them. For Ethan and Charlotte, there was no greater gift than seeing Maddie blossom. Despite still facing challenges, Maddie was finding her voice, and with that, her confidence and happiness continued to grow. Charlotte and Ethan knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, the rebirth of a girl who finally felt loved and safe. As Maddie continued to progress, a new issue arose in the family's life: unexpected contact with a figure from Maddie's past. One afternoon, Charlotte received a call from Penelope Walsh, director of the shelter. "Charlotte," began Penelope hesitantly, "we received a visitor here at the shelter. Someone claiming to be a relative of Maddie." Charlotte felt a shiver run down her spine. "Who is it?" she asked, apprehensively. Penelope explained that it was Daniel Hughes, a man who claimed to be Maddie's uncle. According to him, he had discovered the girl's location after years of searching, using the services of a private investigator. "He seems genuine," said Penelope. "But I thought you should know first." Charlotte and Ethan decided to get to know Daniel before allowing any interaction with Maddie. They arranged a meeting at a nearby cafe and were surprised to find a young man, with a simple appearance and a visibly emotional look. "Thank you for having me," he said, shaking both their hands. Daniel explained that he was the younger brother of Maddie's biological father, who had died in a car accident shortly after her birth. He revealed that his paternal family never knew Maddie's whereabouts after her adoption, but that he had never given up looking for her. "I just want to meet my niece," he said, with tears in his eyes. Although moved, Charlotte and Ethan were cautious. They explained that Maddie was still in a delicate process of emotional recovery and that any abrupt change could be harmful. Daniel, understanding, agreed to give the couple time to decide how and when to introduce him into Maddie's life. "I don't want to get in the way," he said. "I just want to be part of her life, if you let me." Back home, Charlotte and Ethan discussed the situation at length. "I don't want to push him away," said Charlotte, "but I also can't risk Maddie's progress." Ethan suggested they start with supervised meetings in a safe environment. "If he's sincere, this could be a positive thing for Maddie," he said. When they told Maddie about Daniel, the reaction was curiosity, but also apprehension. She still had difficulty trusting strangers, but with encouragement from Ethan and Charlotte, she agreed to meet her uncle. The first meeting took place in the park, where Daniel brought a special gift, a photo album with images of Maddie's biological family. As she flipped through the album, Maddie seemed intrigued, pointing to faces that reminded her of herself. Although she didn't speak, her eyes sparkled with interest, and she approached Daniel in a shy but sincere way. "She's amazing," Daniel told Charlotte and Ethan. "Thank you for taking care of her with so much love." Over time, Daniel began to participate more actively in Maddie's life, always with Charlotte and Ethan's approval. He shared stories about her biological parents and created moments that helped Maddie understand her origins without feeling like it diminished her place in her new family. Although Daniel's presence brought complexity to the family dynamic, it also brought a sense of completeness. Charlotte, Ethan, and Maddie continued to grow as a unit, but now with the knowledge that love not only fills gaps, but also builds bridges to the future. As Daniel grew closer and closer to Maddie, Charlotte and Ethan began to realize that the addition of a new member to the girl's life brought unexpected challenges. Although Daniel was kind and clearly dedicated, Maddie showed signs of emotional confusion. One night, while playing with her building blocks, she suddenly stopped and looked at Charlotte, pointing to one of the drawings she had made. It was a house with two figures on one side and a separate one on the other. Charlotte, worried, sat down next to her. "Do you want to tell me what you're feeling?" he asked, holding Maddie's hands. The girl just pointed to the drawing again, with a look that mixed sadness and uncertainty. Charlotte knew that although Maddie was making progress in her recovery, Daniel's presence was bringing new layers of complexity to what was already a delicate situation. In a late-night conversation, Charlotte and Ethan decided they needed to find a way to integrate Daniel into Maddie's life without compromising the emotional stability she was finally beginning to achieve. "We helped her build a foundation," Ethan said. "Now we need to ensure that this foundation does not shake." Charlotte agreed, but still had questions about how to balance everything. The next day, they invited Daniel to their home for lunch, during which they openly discussed the situation. "We know you want to be a part of her life," Charlotte said, "and we don't want to push him away. But Maddie is still in the healing process. We need this to be done carefully." Daniel, always understanding, assured that he would respect the established limits. "I want what's best for her," he said, "and I trust you to guide her." From that moment on, they began to implement regular, supervised meetings where Maddie could interact with Daniel in a safe and familiar environment. Ethan suggested activities that involved the whole family, such as picnics and visits to the park, so that Maddie wouldn't feel pressured to divide her attention between her parents and uncle. Little by little, the girl began to feel more comfortable, developing a special bond with Daniel without compromising her connection with Charlotte and Ethan. Meanwhile, Maddie continued to make progress in her speech therapy. One day, during one of these sessions, he managed to clearly say his first complete word, "Mommy." Charlotte, who was watching alongside Dr. Brooks, became emotional, holding Maddie in a tight hug. "You did it, honey," she said with tears in her eyes. The achievement was a milestone that reinforced the family's determination to continue fighting for Maddie's well-being. Even with progress, there were moments of tension. During a date with Daniel, Maddie began crying for no apparent reason, refusing to interact with him. Charlotte realized that even though Maddie was bonding, there were still emotional wounds that needed to be addressed. "This is normal," Dr. Brooks explained later. "She is navigating complex emotions. The important thing is to continue showing that she is loved." Ethan and Charlotte began to include Maddie in decisions involving her, giving her a sense of control over her life. When asked if she wanted to invite Daniel to her birthday party, Maddie smiled shyly and nodded. During the party, she surprised everyone by calling Daniel Uncle for the first time, a gesture that moved not only him, but also everyone present. The balance between Maddie's past, represented by Daniel, and the present, with Charlotte and Ethan, began to consolidate. They created a dynamic where Maddie felt like she could have the best of both worlds without having to choose between them. It was a reminder that family is not just about blood ties, but also about love and commitment. For Charlotte, seeing Maddie blossom was the greatest reward. Despite all the challenges, she knew that her decision to open her heart and home to Maddie had transformed not only the girl's life, but hers and Ethan's as well. Together, they were building something that went beyond a conventional family. They were creating a home where love was the basis of everything. As the years passed, Maddie continued to overcome the adversities that marked her early life. His voice, once silenced by trauma, was now used frequently, albeit with occasional difficulties. Every word she spoke was celebrated by Charlotte, Ethan, and Daniel as a triumph of determination and love. At 10 years old, Maddie was a curious, creative, and full of life child, whose story inspired everyone around her. The family maintained a structured routine, balancing school, extracurricular activities, and moments of connection at home. Maddie excelled at art, winning prizes in school competitions with her detailed and exciting drawings. One of his works, titled Minha Casa, showed a family together under a starry sky. "This is about you," she explained to Charlotte and Ethan, now in clearer words. "My home is where you are." The relationship with Daniel also evolved. He became an important figure in Maddie's life, attending school events and offering support whenever needed. During a genealogy project at school, Daniel helped Maddie put together a family tree that included both her biological parents as well as Charlotte and Ethan. "You have two families," he explained, "and they both love you very much." Charlotte, in turn, began to get involved in initiatives aimed at children in vulnerable situations. Inspired by Maddie's story, she created an organization called Voices Unheard, which provided emotional and educational support for children in shelters. Ethan, always by her side, contributed by organizing health campaigns and offering free consultations for children at risk. A defining moment occurred when Maddie was invited to speak at an event organized by Voices Unheard. Although nervous, she took the stage and, with the microphone in her hand, said, "I want to thank my mom and dad. They believed in me when I couldn't speak. And now I can. Thank you for giving me a family." His words moved everyone present, showing the profound impact of his journey. As Charlotte and Ethan watched Maddie grow up, they reflected on how their lives had changed since the moment Ethan decided to take the girl home. "She gave us as much as we gave her," Ethan said one night as they looked through old photos. Charlotte nodded, holding his hand. "She showed us what really matters in life: love, patience, and faith in the future." Maddie, now more confident and happy, began to dream big. "I want to be a doctor like you, Daddy," she told Ethan. "I want to help kids like me." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "You can be anything you want, baby," he replied. "And I'm sure it will be amazing." On Maddie's 15th birthday, the family organized a big party, inviting friends, relatives, and even colleagues from the shelter where it all started. During the celebration, Maddie made sure to thank everyone who supported her on her journey. "I was never alone," she said. "Even in difficult times, there was always someone to help me. And for that, I am very grateful." Maddie's future seemed bright, full of possibilities that had previously seemed unattainable. Ethan and Charlotte knew that the road to get there hadn't been easy, but each challenge they faced only strengthened the bonds between them. Together, they had created not just a family, but a living example that love and resilience can transform lives. At the end of that night, as Maddie blew out the candles on the cake, Charlotte whispered to Ethan, "She is our miracle." Ethan smiled, hugging his wife and watching Maddie surrounded by people who loved her. "Yes," he replied, "and she is proof that love can heal everything."